They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I completely disagree. True revenge is an encrypted server log, a time-stamped email, and a corporate boardroom with the air conditioning cranked so high you can see a tech bro shivering when he realizes he is going to federal prison for stealing $14 million. You never need to yell to destroy a career. You just give him enough rope and wait for the federal auditors. Hello to the amazing listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero operating budget to keep producing these narratives. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, verified true stories that are far more detailed, significantly longer, and feature multiple emotional voice actors for intense content we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link found in the video description and pinned comment. Now, let us begin today's story. My name is Caroline Phillips, and this is how I dismantled a corporate fraud. I am 38 years old, and I have spent the last decade working as the Senior Data Risk Analyst at Aeromedic Solutions down in Austin, Texas. If you know anything about the modern tech world, you know that Austin has rapidly become a playground for the new tech elite. But Aeromedics was not supposed to be a playground. We handled highly sensitive medical data. I am talking about deeply personal patient histories, chronic illness diagnoses, prescription records, and social security numbers. My entire existence at the company revolved around building and maintaining the invisible walls of our security firewall. I was the silent guardian keeping the company from facing crippling federal lawsuits over medical data breaches. I worked in the shadows, fueled by black coffee and endless lines of code, ensuring that every single byte of information remained securely locked away from unauthorized eyes. For years, my cautious and meticulous nature was exactly what the board of directors wanted. But then the culture shifted. The solid, engineering-first mentality that originally built Aeromedics was slowly being choked out by a shallow, explosive startup culture. We stopped hiring brilliant engineers and started filling the open floor plan with loud, aggressively confident executives who viewed compliance and security as annoying obstacles to fast profit. The absolute embodiment of this toxic culture shift arrived in the form of Trenton. At just 32 years old, Trenton was appointed as our brand new Chief Financial Officer. He did not have a background in healthcare logistics, nor did he understand the severe legal gravity of managing patient privacy. Trenton came straight from the chaotic world of cryptocurrency investment. He wore custom-tailored suits, drank overpriced matcha lattes, and constantly bombarded the office with obnoxious buzzwords like agile framework, disruptive innovation, and hyperscaling. He strutted through the corporate corridors as if he owned the entire grid. To Trenton, the highly sensitive medical records resting on our secure servers were not human lives. They were not strict liabilities protected by federal law. In his eyes, that data was simply an endless gold mine waiting to be recklessly exploited. Within his first 90 days, Trenton stood in front of the entire company and announced his grand vision, which he proudly called the Data Commercialization Campaign. His plan was aggressively simple and entirely illegal. He wanted to take our massive archives of medical data, strip away the bare minimum of identifiers, and sell the files directly to third-party advertising networks. The singular goal was to generate explosive, instantaneous revenue to make his quarterly reports look like a financial miracle. He demanded that we bypass our rigorous encryption protocols to expedite the data transfers. He wanted to sell unencrypted medical files to marketing firms so they could target patients with specialized pharmaceutical advertisements. I ran a diagnostic on his proposed transfer pathways, and my blood ran cold. The vulnerabilities were catastrophic. We were not just bending the rules. We were preparing to shatter federal health privacy laws into a million pieces. I knew I had to put my objections in writing. On the morning of April 12th, at exactly 9:15, I drafted a comprehensive, formal warning email. I did not use emotional language. I used cold, hard facts. I explicitly detailed the specific federal statutes his plan would violate. I projected the exact millions of dollars in regulatory fines the company would face, and I outlined the severe legal risks of selling improperly encrypted data. I attached the risk assessment logs, addressed the email directly to Trenton, copied the legal department, and hit send. I watched the digital timestamp lock the message into the immutable server registry. It was a permanent record of my warning. I sat at my desk, expecting an immediate, panicked response. I anticipated an emergency meeting with the legal team to halt the campaign. Instead, the office remained entirely quiet. 2 hours later, Trenton finally strolled over to my cubicle. He did not look concerned. He looked profoundly annoyed. He leaned against the gray fabric wall of my workspace, holding his phone in one hand. "Caroline, I read your little manifesto," Trenton said, letting out a condescending sigh. "You are being completely paranoid. You are looking at this through the lens of archaic friction. This is the new era of data liquidity. I need you to stop being an obsolete roadblock and start understanding modern financial vision. We are moving fast and breaking things." "You are going to break federal law," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "The data sets you want to sell are not properly sanitized. If those files leak, the fines will bankrupt this company." Trenton rolled his eyes, treating my serious legal warning as if I were a stubborn child complaining about a broken toy. "I am the chief financial officer. I balance the risk against the reward. You just handle the firewalls, stay in your lane, Caroline, and let the adults handle the revenue." He turned around and walked away, completely dismissing the time-stamped email that clearly laid out his impending crimes. He genuinely thought I was just a rigid, old-fashioned technician who failed to grasp his brilliant corporate strategy. He honestly believed his reckless tactics would turn him into an untouchable titan of the tech industry. He was incredibly wrong. The pristine silence of the secure operations floor was something I cherished deeply. It was a quiet sanctuary of logic, algorithms, and encrypted pathways that kept our entire company legally safe. That quiet sanctuary was aggressively violated on a Tuesday morning by a cloud of overpowering floral perfume and the blinding glare of a portable ring light. The loud disruption came in the form of Sierra, Trenton's newly engaged fiancée. Sierra was a professional lifestyle influencer whose entire existence seemed carefully curated for maximum internet validation. She had unexpectedly descended upon our Austin headquarters to film a video she loudly announced as a day in the life of a tech boss wife. She was not a corporate employee. She had absolutely no security clearance. Yet, she was treating our highly sensitive medical data facility like a rented studio set for her superficial social media content. I was deep inside the primary server room conducting a routine integrity check on our firewalls. This was a highly restricted, temperature-controlled vault requiring biometric access just to open the door. The heavy steel entrance had been carelessly propped open by a terrified junior intern who apparently did not have the courage to say no to the demanding partner of the chief financial officer. Sierra marched right past the bright red warning signs, holding a smartphone mounted on a heavy stabilizing gimbal. She was wearing an oversized designer blazer and aggressively chunky sneakers, speaking to her camera with a bright, artificial enthusiasm that made my teeth grind together. "And here we are in the absolute brain of the whole operation," Sierra squealed to her digital audience, panning the camera toward the towering racks of blinking servers. "It is giving very much hacker vibes, but we are about to bring some major fun energy to this dark little basement." I stood up slowly from my diagnostic terminal, my security access badge hanging strictly from my lanyard. I stared at her, completely unamused by the intrusion. Before I could formally instruct her to leave the premises, Sierra aggressively shoved the bright white ring light directly into my face, nearly blinding me. "Oh my gosh, you are absolutely perfect for this," Sierra gasped, grabbing my arm and trying to physically pull me away from the sensitive console. "We are doing the corporate burnout dance challenge. It is trending so hard right now. You just have to pretend to drop your coffee, look super exhausted, and then we both do this little hip-hop thing. Ready? I will count down from 3. I firmly pulled my arm out of her sudden grasp. I did not smile. I did not soften my tone to accommodate her fragile influencer ego. I spoke with the icy precision of a senior analyst who fully understood the devastating legal penalties of an unauthorized recording in a secure medical facility. "You need to turn off that camera immediately and exit this room," I stated, my voice echoing coldly over the steady hum of the cooling fans. "This is a federally regulated restricted zone. You are violating basic security protocols just by breathing the air in here. Get out." Sierra froze in place. Her artificial smile completely dissolved, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, theatrical offense. She lowered the camera slightly, her perfectly manicured eyebrows narrowing as she looked me up and down with intense disgust. She muttered something incredibly rude under her breath about my toxic energy, dramatically spun around, and stormed out of the server room, her chunky sneakers squeaking loudly against the floor tiles. I immediately closed the heavy steel door, engaged the biometric lock, and filed a formal security incident report documenting the breach. I naively assumed that would be the end of the ridiculous situation. I was entirely wrong. Less than 48 hours later, my face was plastered across the internet. Sierra had not deleted the unauthorized footage. Instead, she had spitefully edited the brief encounter to destroy my reputation. The video she posted was heavily doctored with dramatic sound effects and a sad, pathetic background song. She cut out my strict warning about federal security protocols entirely. The false narrative she crafted showed her being bubbly and inclusive, trying to bring joy to a gloomy office, only to be brutally shut down by a miserable, aging employee. The giant text overlay aggressively branded me as the dark office auntie who hates innovation. The video went spectacularly viral. Within a single day, it amassed over 3 million views. My phone started vibrating endlessly with messages from concerned colleagues as the comment section became a massive cesspool of digital mockery. Thousands of complete strangers were viciously tearing apart my appearance, my serious professional demeanor, and my supposed lack of fun. They called me a corporate dinosaur, a bitter spinster, and a massive roadblock who was holding back a modern, dynamic company. The public humiliation was sudden, vast, and completely suffocating. I had spent a decade protecting this company in the shadows, and in less than a minute, I was reduced to a global punchline by a woman who did not even know what a basic firewall was. I fully expected the Human Resources Department to intervene on my behalf. I expected the company legal team to demand Sierra take down the video because it clearly featured an illegal recording of our secure facilities. Instead of support, I received a sudden calendar invite for a mandatory disciplinary meeting with Trenton. When I walked into Trenton's lavish glass office, he did not look remotely apologetic for his partner breaching a secure zone. He looked incredibly triumphant. He was leaning back in his expensive leather chair, his perfectly manicured hands steepled together in a gesture of absolute arrogance. "Caroline, we have a very serious problem regarding your impact on our company culture," Trenton began, using his most condescending executive tone. "Aeromedics is rapidly pivoting toward a younger, more dynamic demographic. We desperately need to project an image of agile innovation. Your behavior in that viral video was incredibly hostile. You embarrassed my fiancé, but more importantly, you severely damaged the energetic brand we are trying to build. You are projecting the exact kind of rigid, obsolete negativity that we are trying to completely eliminate from our workspace." "She breached a secure server room to film a social media dance," I replied, refusing to break eye contact or show any weakness. "I was doing the job you pay me to do." "Your job is whatever I determine it to be," Trenton snapped angrily, leaning forward and slamming his hands on the desk. "And right now, your severe lack of social intelligence makes you a massive liability in a leadership role. Effective immediately, you are being permanently removed from the senior data risk team. We are transitioning you into a brand new role. You are going to be our culture coordinator." The fabricated title was a deliberate, mocking insult. It was a completely fake position designed specifically to strip me of all my real professional responsibilities. Furthermore, Trenton continued, a deeply malicious smirk playing on his lips. Since you are no longer handling data risk analysis, you no longer require your high-level administrative privileges. Your master access to the core medical data systems is being revoked as we speak. I stood there in complete silence. I realized exactly what he was doing in that very moment. He was not just petty and punishing me for insulting his influencer fiancée. He was actively using this viral internet nonsense as a highly convenient excuse to permanently lock me out of the security system. He desperately wanted me out of the way so he could finally execute his illegal data commercialization scheme without my constant surveillance blocking his path. He thought he had completely disarmed me. He thought the dark office ante was finally defeated, banished to a miserable desk in the corner to organize birthday parties and order office snacks. He had absolutely no idea what was actually coming for him. My new workspace was a profound insult manifested in cheap laminated wood and flickering fluorescent lights. They had banished me to a damp, poorly ventilated corner on the second floor, located precisely between the roaring freight elevator and the constantly malfunctioning staff restroom. My completely fabricated title was Culture Coordinator, which practically meant my entire professional existence was now consumed by organizing employee birthday spreadsheets, ordering dietary-specific cupcakes, and drafting aggressively cheerful memos about mandatory team-building exercises. It was a suffocating, mind-numbing daily routine specifically designed to break my spirit and humiliate me into resigning. While I sat in my miserable little corner sorting through catering receipts and party hats, the upper executive floors of the Aeromedics Tower were practically vibrating with corporate euphoria. Trenton was throwing extravagant, catered parties to celebrate a massive surge in our third quarter profits. He strutted around the building like a conquering king, fully believing he had completely neutralized the only threat to his fraudulent empire. Trenton was moving incredibly fast now that he confidently thought nobody was watching the security gates. I heard the loud rumors floating down to my dark corner of the building. He had officially signed off on his highly illegal data commercialization campaign. He was finalizing a monumental, unprecedented deal to sell a massive cache of our highly sensitive patient archives to a notoriously aggressive marketing conglomerate. The total value of the transaction was exactly $14 million. In his deeply arrogant mind, he had completely won the game. He had successfully revoked my administrative privileges, locked me out of the core server framework, and legally blinded me to his daily operations. He foolishly assumed that taking away my digital keys meant I could no longer see the doors being opened. Trenton fundamentally misunderstood how a seasoned, paranoid security architect operates. You absolutely never build a digital fortress without leaving a deeply hidden window for yourself. Weeks before his loud influencer fiancée ever stepped foot in our building, back when Trenton first announced his reckless vision to sell off patient records, I saw the writing on the wall. I knew a man that, deeply obsessed with rapid wealth and startup buzzwords, would eventually try to push me out of the system. So, on a very quiet Sunday morning when the office was completely empty, I wrote a highly specialized piece of code. I embedded a shadow audit protocol deep within the foundational architecture of the primary servers. This was not a standard monitoring tool that would ever show up on an IT security dashboard. It was a phantom script, completely invisible to routine system scans, running silently underneath the deepest layers of the operating system. Its singular function was to act as an unblinking digital mirror. Anytime someone bypassed our legal encryption protocols to access or transfer raw medical data, my phantom script automatically duplicated the access logs, the destination IP addresses, the exact volume of the files being moved, and the specific user credentials authorizing the transfer. Trenton genuinely thought my dusty, outdated computer in the culture coordination cubicle was completely disconnected from the network core. He did not know my little shadow audit was silently and continuously bleeding all of that highly classified, incriminating information directly into a hidden partition on my local hard drive. Every single afternoon, while the rest of the office blindly thought I was busy picking out colorful decorations for the upcoming corporate retreat, I was actually sitting in the cold glow of my monitor, watching Trenton commit massive federal crimes in real time. The sheer volume of the data flow was terrifying. I watched his user credentials authorize the wholesale transfer of unencrypted health histories, completely ignoring the rigorous sanitization protocols required by federal law. I meticulously cross-referenced every single illegal transfer with the strict legal warnings I had explicitly laid out in my formal email on April 12th. Every single disaster I had predicted was coming true, line by line, byte by byte. But as I dug deeper into the massive transactional data tied to the $14 million sale, I noticed a very strange, highly sophisticated anomaly in the financial routing sequences. The raw data was definitely flowing out to the marketing conglomerate, but the incoming capital was being fractured before it reached us. The payments were not flying directly into the primary Aeromedics corporate accounts as they should have been. I traced the digital signatures, navigating my way through complex layers of financial routing, and my breath suddenly caught in my throat. The $14 million was not just a catastrophic privacy violation, it was a massive, highly calculated embezzlement scheme. Trenton was not just selling out our vulnerable patients to boost the company revenue metrics, he had deliberately manipulated the vendor contracts to funnel a clean 15% commission directly away from Aeromedics. I tracked the routing numbers through a maze of dummy corporations until I hit a highly obscured shell company registered in Delaware. It took me 3 exhausting days of relentless digital digging to peel back the thick layers of corporate camouflage protecting that specific shell company. When I finally cracked the final registration documents, I found the sole proprietor, the hidden offshore accounts, the massive 15% cut of the illegal data sale. The entire fraudulent financial structure belonged entirely to Trenton. He was systematically robbing the company blind while simultaneously exposing them to ruinous federal lawsuits. The sheer magnitude of his greed was almost beautiful because it was so incredibly reckless. He had personally handed me the absolute perfect weapon to completely destroy him. I did not panic. I did not rush to the Human Resources Department to complain. I operated with the cold, mechanical precision of a seasoned investigator. I carefully extracted every single piece of digital forensic evidence. I pulled the offshore routing numbers, the core server access logs, the bypassed encryption records, and the shell company registration details. I transferred all of this devastating, irrefutable proof onto a high-capacity, military-grade encrypted external hard drive. I slipped the heavy metal drive into the bottom of my leather purse, zipping it shut with a satisfying click. I sat back in my cheap plastic chair, listening to the distant, muffled sound of champagne corks popping on the executive floor far above me. Trenton was loudly celebrating his own genius. He thought he was a completely invincible tech giant. I gently patted my purse, feeling the solid, cold weight of his impending doom resting against my side. I was no longer just an angry, humiliated employee looking for petty payback. I was the silent architect of his absolute destruction, and I was perfectly content to wait in the shadows until his day of judgment finally arrived. The fragile illusion of Trenton and his endless corporate victories completely shattered during the second week of November. Aeromedics was suddenly thrust into high-stakes merger negotiations. A massive, historically established medical conglomerate had set its sights on acquiring our company. They wanted to absorb our supposedly innovative data logistics framework into their national network. But a corporate giant does not simply hand over hundreds of millions of dollars based on flashy presentations and buzzwords. The acquisition automatically triggered a mandatory, brutally comprehensive independent audit. The auditing firm they sent was not playing the startup game. They dispatched a team of veteran forensic accountants who wore conservative gray suits and carried themselves with the chilling precision of federal investigators. They did not care about ping-pong tables, matcha lattes, or agile synergy. They cared exclusively about hard numbers, strict legal compliance, and ironclad server logs. For the first time since he seized power, Trenton was no longer the smartest or the loudest person in the room. He was a cornered animal wearing a custom-tailored suit. It took the veteran auditors exactly 48 hours to detect the massive, glaring fractures in the financial ice. They zeroed in directly on the revenue spike from the third quarter. A sudden, undocumented influx of $14 million generated entirely from raw data sales is an anomaly that screams for investigation. The auditors calmly requested the corresponding compliance certificates, the encryption verification logs, and the specific vendor contracts tied to the transaction. They wanted to know exactly how Aeromedics managed to legally sanitize and sell that much highly protected patient information in such a short window of time. Trenton had absolutely nothing to give them. There were no compliance certificates because he had completely bypassed them. There were no encryption logs because the data had been transferred completely raw. And the vendor contracts were hopelessly tangled in the illegal routing sequences that siphoned his secret 15% commission. From my quiet desk near the freight elevator, I watched the absolute chaos unfold. The confident swagger completely vanished from Trenton. His face turned an ashen shade of pale. He spent his days sprinting frantically between the executive boardroom and the glass-enclosed IT department. In a state of sheer, blinding panic, he made the most catastrophic mistake a white-collar criminal can make. He tried to hide the bodies while the detectives were already standing in the house. Trenton burst into the primary server operations center and ordered the newly hired, deeply inexperienced junior engineering team to execute a massive, uncoordinated data purge. He commanded them to permanently delete the entire foundational history of the server access logs, hoping to wipe away the digital footprints of his illegal transfers and his hidden offshore routing. But these new technicians were completely clueless. They did not understand the complex, interwoven architecture of the security firewalls I had meticulously built over a decade. They blindly executed a massive delete command on active load-bearing directories. The result was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. The entire central database collapsed in on itself. The internal network crashed hard, locking every single employee out of their workstations and throwing the main server room into a screaming chorus of red emergency alarms. The system failure was so catastrophic that it effectively stopped the entire company dead in its tracks. The lead auditor, a terrifyingly calm man with silver hair, marched directly out of the boardroom and stared at the smoking ruins of the IT department. The system crash was no longer just a red flag. It was a massive, glowing beacon of intentional sabotage. The auditors immediately halted their financial review and demanded a full forensic explanation. They looked at the terrified junior engineers, who were currently sweating through their shirts and frantically typing on dead consoles, and quickly realized these kids had absolutely no idea how the system was actually constructed. "Who built the original security architecture?" the lead auditor demanded, his voice slicing through the frantic noise of the server room. "Who designed the underlying database structure before this current team took over?" Trenton stepped forward, sweating profusely, his expensive silk tie suddenly looking like a hangman's noose. He waved his hands frantically, desperately trying to construct a barrier of lies. "That would be Caroline Phillips," Trenton stammered, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "But you absolutely do not want to speak with her. She is no longer involved in data risk management. We had to demote her down to a basic culture coordination role. She has severe issues with her mental capacity. She suffered a massive psychological breakdown and became incredibly hostile toward our modern corporate vision. She is completely unreliable and technically obsolete." He was betting his entire freedom on the hope that the auditors would simply accept his slander and walk away. He was hoping my fake title and my desk by the restrooms would convince them I was a broken, useless asset. The lead auditor slowly turned his gaze away from the ruined server racks and looked directly into Trenton's terrified eyes. He did not blink. He did not buy a single word of the pathetic excuse. "I do not care if she coordinates birthday parties or sweeps the floors," the lead auditor stated with absolute, chilling authority. "We are operating under a legally binding discovery mandate. We require the original architect to explain this catastrophic failure, and we require her right now. Summon Caroline Phillips to the secure briefing room immediately." Trenton physically deflated, his shoulders slumping as the absolute reality of the situation finally crushed him. He could no longer hide behind his buzzwords or his executive title. The walls were rapidly closing in, and the very woman he had publicly humiliated and banished to the shadows was now the only person with the power to translate the wreckage he had created. He had no choice but to send someone down to my miserable little corner to fetch me. The game was finally over, and it was my turn to play. I was escorted by a highly nervous human resources representative up to the completely soundproofed executive briefing room on the 42nd floor. The journey up the glass elevator felt like a slow, deliberate march toward absolute victory. I had spent months sitting in a damp corner by the restrooms, quietly enduring the public humiliation and the endless stream of toxic corporate buzzwords, waiting patiently for this exact moment to arrive. When the heavy oak doors finally swung open, the atmosphere inside was thick enough to physically choke on. The silver-haired lead auditor sat at the absolute center of the massive mahogany table, flanked by 3 of his senior forensic accountants. They all wore identical expressions of grim determination. Directly across from them sat Marcus, our company chief legal officer. Marcus was a seasoned corporate attorney, but right now he looked utterly exhausted, sweating through his expensive dress shirt and appearing physically ill. The massive glass windows behind them offered a sprawling, beautiful view of the bright Austin skyline, but absolutely nobody was looking outside. All eyes immediately locked onto me as I walked through the door. Trenton had undoubtedly painted a vivid picture of me as a broken, mentally unstable employee who had been banished to a dark corner because I could not handle the modern pace of technology. I did not look broken. I walked with my spine perfectly straight, my shoulders back, carrying a very thick, hard-bound black folder in my hands. My facial expression was completely neutral, radiating an eerie, unshakable calm. I was an executioner stepping quietly up to the block, holding the undeniable truth in my hands. I did not wait for the auditors to interrogate me or for Marcus to offer a standard corporate greeting. I walked deliberately to the very edge of the table, offered an incredibly tight, polite smile, and placed the heavy black folder directly in front of the lead auditor. The loud thud of the paper hitting the polished wood echoed sharply in the completely silent room. "Good morning, gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, cold, and painfully clear. "I understand that the primary data servers down on the 3rd floor have just suffered a catastrophic collapse due to a massive, unauthorized system purge. I also strongly suspect that the executive leadership has enthusiastically informed you that I am technically obsolete, mentally compromised, and completely disconnected from the foundational network architecture. I am here to tell you that was a highly convenient, incredibly desperate lie." I reached out and slowly opened the thick black folder. Inside was a massive stack of high-resolution, color-printed documents. Every single page was meticulously organized with numbered colored tabs, representing weeks of silent, grueling digital surveillance. Months ago, before my high-level administrative credentials were aggressively and unfairly revoked, I continued, making direct, unflinching eye contact with Marcus, I foresaw a severe, catastrophic breach in our legal security compliance. To protect the company and our patients, I engineered and deployed a highly classified, completely invisible shadow audit script deep within the foundational core of our network. It operated completely independent of the primary logging directories that your newly hired junior technicians just blindly destroyed. Every single illegal data transfer, every bypassed encryption protocol, and every unauthorized digital footprint from the past 6 months has been permanently recorded. I safely stored all of this raw data on an offline, military-grade encrypted hard drive. What you are looking at in this folder right now is the raw, unalterable, absolute truth. The lead auditor did not say a single word. He slowly reached out and pulled the folder closer to him, his sharp eyes scanning the incredibly dense lines of server logs, hexadecimal strings, and network access records. The room was absolutely silent except for the crisp, rhythmic sound of heavy paper turning. "Let us begin our review with tab 1, I instructed coldly, taking total command of the room. That document is a direct, verified copy of a formal risk assessment email I personally sent to our Chief Financial Officer on the morning of April 12th. In that specific document, I explicitly mapped out the exact federal privacy violations and the massive legal risks associated with his proposed plan to sell unencrypted patient records to third-party vendors. If you look closely at the attached metadata registry printed on the second page, you will notice the permanent, unalterable timestamp. More importantly, you will notice that the message status pulled directly from his executive terminal still reads as unread. Trenton willfully ignored a formal legal warning regarding federal health compliance because he did not care about the law. Marcus, the chief legal officer, let out a sharp, ragged gasp. He rubbed his temples aggressively as if trying to physically massage away a massive migraine. He was a lawyer, and he knew exactly what that unread status meant. It completely destroyed any potential defense of corporate negligence or accidental oversight. It proved willful, malicious ignorance, but I was not even close to being finished with my presentation. Now, I strongly suggest you turn your attention to tab 4, I said, leaning forward slightly, letting the full, crushing weight of the trap slowly close around them. You are currently investigating a massive, undocumented revenue spike of exactly $14 million. The internal routing documents Trenton provided likely show those funds coming directly from a massive advertising conglomerate. However, my shadow audit silently tracked the complete digital transit of that money across the global network. The incoming capital was deliberately fractured during the transfer. A clean, precise 15% commission was surgically siphoned off the top before the remaining balance ever reached the Aeromedics corporate bank accounts. The three junior forensic accountants sitting next to the lead auditor frantically began cross-referencing my printed logs with the data on their own highly encrypted digital tablets. If you trace the outgoing digital protocol addresses perfectly listed on page 42, I continued, my voice sharp and precise as a surgical blade, you will see the exact digital destination of that stolen 15%. The money was routed directly into a highly obscured shell company registered in the state of Delaware. I took the personal liberty of running a deep background extraction on that specific corporate entity, the proprietary registration documents, the offshore routing numbers, and the ultimate ownership signatures are securely located in tab 7. The lead auditor flipped forcefully to the 7th section. His eyes widened slightly, a very rare and significant break in his completely stoic, professional demeanor. The sole registered owner of that Delaware shell company and the exclusive beneficiary of the hidden offshore bank accounts currently receiving the stolen funds is Trenton, I stated loudly, making sure every single syllable rang crystal clear through the large room. He bypassed our legal firewalls, not just to boost his quarterly revenue numbers, but to personally pocket millions of dollars in highly illegal financial kickbacks. Marcus abruptly stood up from his heavy leather chair. His face entirely drained of all color. He looked exactly as though the solid floor had completely dropped out from beneath his feet. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table just to keep himself standing upright. This is no longer a simple civil privacy violation regarding medical data, Marcus whispered to the room, his voice trembling violently with sheer horror and realization. This is highly premeditated corporate embezzlement. This is a massive federal crime that will bring down the entire Department of Justice upon us. It actually gets significantly worse than that, Marcus, I replied, preparing to deliver the final, completely devastating blow. I reached into the inner pocket of my professional suit jacket, pulled out a single, neatly folded sheet of paper, and slid it directly across the smooth wooden table toward the lead auditor. This final document was pulled from my offline monitor just 24 hours ago, I said, my tone dropping to a deadly quiet register that commanded absolute attention. It is the master system administrator log from the exact moment the entire server network collapsed yesterday afternoon. It clearly shows the specific internal network address that authorized the junior engineering team to execute the massive data purge. The command was not a system error. The command was issued directly from Trenton and his personal executive suite terminal. He actively ordered the complete destruction of critical, legally protected company records, while fully knowing a federal corporate audit was actively taking place inside this very building. The room descended into a breathless, suffocating silence. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had completely crushed its target into absolute dust. I had methodically handed them a bulletproof, perfectly documented criminal case wrapped in a neat black folder. Trenton had not just stolen $14 million, he had committed severe corporate fraud, completely compromised the deeply personal medical privacy of thousands of vulnerable patients, and then deliberately destroyed secure data systems to desperately hide his massive theft. The final piece of paper I just handed them proved his absolute intent to cover up the entire operation. It instantly elevated his panicked actions to textbook, undeniable obstruction of justice. The lead auditor slowly closed the thick black folder, let out a long, heavy breath, and reached into his jacket for his encrypted mobile phone to make a very serious call to the federal authorities. The invisible walls I built had finally closed in. Less than 2 hours after I delivered the black folder, the Aeromedics Board of Directors convened an emergency, mandatory meeting in the Grand Executive Boardroom. The atmosphere was incredibly dense, heavy with the silent anticipation of an impending execution. I sat quietly in the back corner, completely hidden in the shadows of the massive room, waiting for the final act to begin. Trenton pushed open the heavy oak doors and practically danced into the room. He was wearing a brand-new, custom-tailored charcoal suit, and his face was glowing with absolute, unchecked arrogance. He looked around at the assembled executives and the lead auditor, his perfect white teeth flashing in a triumphant smile. He completely misread the chilling silence in the room. In his incredibly inflated ego, he genuinely believed this sudden gathering was a surprise celebration. He thought the board was about to hand him a massive bonus check and pop open expensive bottles of champagne to toast his brilliant leadership in securing the corporate merger. He strutted over to the head of the massive oak table and prepared to give a victory speech. Before he could even utter a single buzzword, the silver-haired lead auditor completely ignored him, reached into his leather briefcase, and pulled out 2 crisp sheets of paper. He placed them flat against the polished wood and silently slid them down the length of the table until they stopped exactly in front of Trenton. There was absolutely no champagne. There was only a formal notice of immediate, non-negotiable termination, resting directly on top of a drafted notification of impending federal criminal indictment. Trenton looked down at the papers. His arrogant smile froze, then slowly melted off his face like wax. He looked up, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an ally who was not there. Panic instantly seized his throat. He immediately launched into a pathetic, desperate defense. "This is a massive misunderstanding," Trenton stammered, his voice cracking wildly. "This is a random system glitch. Those completely incompetent junior staff members destroyed the servers without my authorization." Marcus, the chief legal officer, did not say a word in response. He simply picked up a small remote control and pressed a single button. The heavy motorized blinds covering the massive glass windows slid shut, plunging the room into darkness. A massive projector screen descended from the ceiling. A blinding beam of light hit the screen, completely illuminating the center of the room. Projected in massive, unavoidable text was the exact email I had sent him on the morning of April 12th. It detailed every single legal risk, every federal violation, and every catastrophic consequence of his data commercialization campaign. And right at the top, glowing like a neon sign, was the digital timestamp and the absolute proof that the message remained completely unread on his end. Trenton stopped speaking. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. But Marcus was not finished. He pressed the button again. The screen shifted to display the highly classified routing documents my shadow audit had captured. The board of directors gasped in unison as they stared at the undeniable proof of the $14 million transaction being sliced apart. The screen clearly showed the 15% commission being violently siphoned away from the company. The final slide displayed the official registration documents for his secret Delaware shell company, complete with his digital signature and the hidden offshore bank account numbers. Trenton physically collapsed. His knees simply gave out, and he fell heavily into the nearest leather chair. All of his arrogant posture, all of his tech world bravado, and all of his condescending buzzwords completely evaporated. He was utterly destroyed under the blinding light of undeniable digital evidence. His excuses were entirely pathetic, thoroughly crushed by the absolute reality of his own greed. The heavy oak doors opened again, and two towering corporate security officers stepped into the room. They did not gently ask him to leave. They marched directly over to Trenton, grabbed him firmly by his upper arms, and hauled him to his feet. As they forcefully escorted him away from the table, Trenton fumbled in his deep panic. His expensive smartphone slipped from his trembling hands and slammed hard against the marble floor. The impact cracked the screen and accidentally bypassed the lock screen. In a moment of pure cinematic justice, the phone suddenly began blaring the exact same upbeat, obnoxiously cheerful pop song his fiancée had used for that mocking TikTok video. The ridiculous music echoed loudly through the silent, serious boardroom as the former chief financial officer was dragged out into the hallway in absolute, permanent disgrace. Once the heavy doors finally closed and the music faded away, the entire board of directors turned their attention to me. The chairman of the board cleared his throat, looking incredibly humbled and desperate. "Caroline," the chairman pleaded, looking directly at me, "we are incredibly sorry for what you have endured. We want to reinstate you to your original position immediately. We will multiply your salary by 3 and give you absolute control over the network if you stay and help us clean this up." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my jacket. I looked at the panicked men sitting around the table, and I offered them a very small, completely cold smile. "I respectfully decline your offer," I replied quietly. During the chaos of this audit, the medical conglomerate attempting to buy this company reviewed my shadow audit code. They were highly impressed. I have already accepted a position as their new senior security executive. I was leaving Aeromedics to go work for the very people who were about to absorb them. I turned around and walked out of the boardroom with my head held high, leaving them completely alone to deal with the massive pile of burning ashes that Trenton had foolishly set on fire. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would love to know where you are listening from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you truly enjoyed today's story and want to help support the channel, please consider joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. You will get instant access to our absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can use the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Have a wonderful day, and always remember to protect your peace.